Good evening from the KCCI studios here in Des Moines. We're interrupting regular programming tonight to bring you a live debate with statewide implications. You're going to hear from 3 Democratic candidates competing to be their party's nominee for the U.S. Senate race.
Since the candidates are running for a statewide federal office, this debate is airing on 4 different television stations across Iowa. We'll now take time to introduce ourselves. I'm Matt Breen with KTIV in Sioux City.
I'm Eric Hansen with KCCI here in Des Moines.
I'm Hernan Gutierrez with KWQC in Davenport.
And I'm Ethan Stein with KCRG in Cedar Rapids.
Now we want to introduce the 3 Democratic candidates running for U.S. Senate. Former Congresswoman Abby Finkenauer has served 1 term in the U.S. House of Representatives, along with 2 terms in the Iowa House of Representatives. Finkenauer lives in Cedar Rapids.
Admiral Mike Franken has served in the U.S. Navy as the first commanding officer of the USS Winston Churchill. He has also worked in several positions at the Pentagon. Franken lives in Sioux City.
Dr. Glenn Hurst has a medical practice and serves as chair of the Rural Caucus for the Iowa Democratic Party. Hurst lives in Minden, where he's a member of the City Council. Now, before we get to questions, here's the format for tonight's debate. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to answer the moderator's question. If a candidate is mentioned by their opponent, they will have 30 seconds to respond. We drew names out of a hat to decide the order in which the candidates will answer the first question tonight.
And that question is about the first draft of a U.S. Supreme Court opinion brought to light earlier this week that appears to overturn Roe v. Wade, the landmark decision which established a constitutional right to an abortion. If the court's final opinion holds and Roe is in fact overturned, President Biden has called for the election of more pro-choice senators and members of the House to adopt legislation that legalizes Roe. So if elected, would you support such legislation? And why should abortion rights be constitutionally protected? Dr. First, you're first. You have 60 seconds.
Sure. Thank you very much. That's an incredibly important question. We are at a crossroads in American history right now. I absolutely would support codifying Roe versus Wade. I've said over and over again that I would be willing to write the law and introduce it in the U.S. Senate. But being willing to vote for it is not the only thing that matters. We have to be able to pass that bill. And we are stuck right now with an archaic problem, the filibuster. We've got to put a representative who's willing to get rid of the filibuster so that we can pass this legislation. It matters. Representation matters. Look at our panel today. Look at our room today. There's 1 woman on air today. Representation matters. We as a country have not gotten to where we want to be. It's taken us 250 years, and we are still arguing about whether a woman is going to have full rights of citizenship in this country. We've got to elect a candidate that will pass Roe versus Wade and end the filibuster.
Thank you, Dr. Hurst. Admiral Franken, you have 60 seconds.
Well, I agree. Step number 1, codify Roe. And I had an interesting situation when this was first announced. I was standing in front of my staff, 14 people in the room, a lot of volunteers from all walks of life. And when this was announced, people, the look on people's faces said everything. And this is about Iowans. It's about women, women's health, women's reproductive health, the next generation, and men as well, in vitro issues, et cetera. And then if this gets overturned, what else then happens? Is it LGBTQ rights? Is it environmental concerns? All those things that the federal government put upon this nation to ensure that we have a great future, are they at risk? Indeed. So yes, I am 100% behind a codification of Roe, and I'm so sorry that those faces of my staff were so dire when this was first announced.
Thank you, Admiral Franken. Congresswoman Finkenauer, you have 60 seconds.
Representation does matter. And to all of the women watching tonight and all the women across this country who are scared and worried about the fact that you have a United States Supreme Court who's going after your rights, I hear you, and I am going to fight for you. Look, we have to take back and actually expand the majority in the United States Senate so that we can get rid of the filibuster, make sure that we can codify Roe. And can you imagine getting to do this Take out the guy who's been there for 47 years, Senator Grassley, who one of his first votes as a United States Senator was a constitutional amendment on abortion, and get to replace him with the youngest woman ever elected to the United States Senate. Representation matters. Unfortunately, I have had to defend my rights as a woman 3 times on the floor of that Iowa State House, and I'm prepared to do it again for women across this country in that United States Senate.
Congresswoman Finkenauer, thank you very much. I want to follow up on that question, if I may. Codification is far from a foregone conclusion, as you know. The president wants more pro-choice senators and members of the House to be elected in the upcoming midterm elections. So let's ask this. In February, lawyers for the state of Iowa argued that a 2018 Iowa Supreme Court decision which declared abortion is a fundamental right under the Iowa Constitution should be overturned. Now, if Roe v. Wade is overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court and codification does not come quickly, should it be left up to states to decide abortion rights? Admiral Franken, you're first.
No, I don't think they should. I think this is a federal issue. This is a rights for across America issue. And people like Representative like Senator Grassley, I mean, this is his legacy, that he has done this. I mean, the dishonesty and the unprofessional conduct of him as the chairman of the Judiciary Subcommittee that has given us this decision with the Trump appointees is an exemplar of what is so wrong about this decision. The people that made this decision should not be in the positions they're in. And consequently, we are all going to be left suffering, especially the next generation. I mean, this is deplorable. The federal government has a role across the nation to make these regulations, these laws. We can't have this varying situation between states. I believe this is a federal issue. Should be codified in federal law.
Admiral, thank you. Congresswoman Finkenauer, the question to you. Should states be able to pick abortion rights?
Absolutely not. If you are a state legislator, you do not belong in my doctor's office or doctor's office of women across this country. If you're a U.S. Supreme Court justice, you don't belong in my doctor's office. What is happening here is horrifying, and it's happening because of the fact we have a current United States Senator who's been sitting there for nearly 5 decades and held up the nomination of Merrick Garland, literally leading to this U.S. Supreme Court. It shouldn't have happened, but here he is doing it and getting what he wanted his entire career, and we must hold him accountable and hold him accountable now. This is imperative. Folks, there are many reasons why we have to win in 2022, but when it comes to our rights, that is now at the top of the list. And here's the thing. It's not just women. Who are they going after next? Are they going to decide now again who you get to marry and who you love? This is, again, something that we have got to make sure that we have real leadership on. And again, unfortunately, I have had too many times on that state house floor already having the experience doing it.
Congresswoman, thank you. Dr. Hurst, the question is to you.
Sure. As a medical professional, I look at the issue of abortion as a procedure. And the federal government doesn't have any right to be involved, the government at all, federal, state, any right to be involved with the decision that a person with a uterus makes regarding their health care. That is a decision for them to make. It's a discussion for them to have with only the people they choose to have it with. We have a constitution that was written for white male landowners, and we have interpreted it to mean all humans in this nation. If we let Roe versus Wade go, then we are making women less of a full citizen in this country. I can't require a person to donate blood. I can't require a person to donate a kidney. I can't require a person to allow a kidney to be used post-mortem without their written permission. Women should have complete control of their bodies at all time. That is a federal issue. It should be made federal law.
Dr. Hurst, thank you.
Moving over to inflation now. In a move to fight inflation, the Federal Reserve just raised the interest rate by a 0.5 percentage point as the prices of everything from gas to groceries is skyrocketing. What could you do as senator to rein in that inflation? That question goes to you, Ms. Finkenauer.
This is something I've been thinking about for a while now. In fact, back in December, as we were seeing these prices start to rise, I actually came out with a whole 5-point plan to even deal with the supply chain crisis in this country, which, by the way, our domestic supply chain has been hurting for decades. And again, you've had Senator Grassley there, sitting there, watching it all happen, and yet hasn't put out any ideas on how to stop it. And so, again, you can go to the website, abbyfinkenauer.com, to see all of the points, but it's a few things. One, you actually even use federal lands to move shipping containers off quicker, hiring more truck drivers, just to name a few. But one of the other things when it comes to gas prices, I mean, I grew up in Sherrill. It's a small town north of Dubuque, more cows than people. And to go anywhere, to go to school, to go to your job, you're driving at least 25 minutes and then there. And then so basically 45 minutes to an hour, a round trip nearly every day. We have to deal with gas prices now. Part of that's holding the companies accountable who are jacking those up, getting paid more than they've ever had. But the other piece is we can actually suspend the gas tax and give people relief now.
Dr. Hurst, same question to you. What can you do to rein in inflation?
Sure. I think the question about inflation, we really need to ask, what is the source of this inflation? And can we call this strictly an inflation problem? We have corporations like Procter & Gamble, Verizon, Coca-Cola, that are recording record profits during this period of inflation. That's not about inflation. That's about profiteering off of fear. That's about profiteering off of middle Americans who buy the toilet paper and the deodorant and the gasoline and the cell phones and cell service in this country. We've got to have strong antitrust enforcement, the likes of which we haven't seen since 1970, when Chuck Grassley was first elected. I believe antitrust action is the key to addressing the long-term problem of inflation.
Thank you, Dr. Hurst. And now, Admiral Franken, you have 60 seconds.
Going back to the 1980s, during the Reagan era of supply-side economics in the trickle-down world, we have exported jobs. We have exported capabilities. We have maximized profits. Consequently, we have such as the IC chip issues, which affect John Deere, getting their new equipment in the fields. We have exported capabilities, and consequently, we're left suffering. President Biden is doing a fabulous job as president. The implications and the increase in inflation in no way spells his success or unsuccess in only 2 years. This is something that has been brewing in a post-pandemic environment, and we need to give him a little room to fix this, and he's got the necessary people and expertise to make it happen. I'm confident that our productivity is going up as a nation. We've got very low job unemployment numbers, and we're going to do great as a society within a short time. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral.
We're going to move on to benefits related to the pandemic. A number of them that were issued federally have ended early here in Iowa. Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program and also unemployment benefits. Would any of you in the Senate add for additional extra benefits to be added with the lingering effects from the pandemic? And Dr. Hurst, we'll start with you for this question.
Well, I think this comes to the question about Build Back Better and so many of the things that were in there that were a long-term solution to these problems that were really highlighted by the pandemic. I'm talking about extending the child tax credit indefinitely. We're talking about things like addressing student loans. I am the candidate that believes we should have student loan forgiveness and we should have reparations in this country for people whose families were affected by slavery. This is the only time I will ironically be in the middle of this debate because I firmly believe that we need to be much more aggressive with these progressive policies that Americans want. We need to get health care for every person in this country. I've stood by Medicare for all since the beginning of my candidacy, and I believe that all of those components go together to address those long-term problems that were unmasked by the COVID crisis.
Admiral Franken, you have the next 60 seconds.
I would use this opportunity to re-energize this nation with different industries, especially clean industries. Iowa's in a great spot. It's in the catbird seat to be this generator of clean energy jobs. With our wind, with our solar, with ethanol, with other means of production for clean energy, Iowa becomes the place, centrally located, and a fabulous opportunity to bring a different caliber of jobs here. In Iowa, we have everything except for decent jobs that increase the wage scale of every worker. Our quality of life and a host of other issues are top-notch, except for things like education and health care. We have a chance in this country, in a post-pandemic environment, to give everybody the type of health care that I had in the military. From enlisted to officer, it matters not. It's the great thing to do. Let's get on that and rejuvenate the economy from within.
Congresswoman Finkenauer, the same question to you.
So we're in an interesting time right now because of the fact in Iowa we have seen, well, actually over the last couple of decades, our smaller towns get smaller and Iowans starting to leave. Honestly, some of the friends I went to high school with who left find better jobs elsewhere. And right now it's kind of interesting because coming through this pandemic, they're wanting to come back home. They're wanting to be in the towns that they grew up in. And this is an opportunity for our country to step up for rural America. In fact, actually one of the first bills, or the first bill I passed in the U.S. House, my first 2 weeks of being there, was a bill creating more opportunities for small businesses in rural Iowa. That's the stuff we should be doing right now. In fact, I also helped fix the map so we even know where broadband actually needs to be. And we've brought, small business owners to hear from them about the fact you have them even going to the local McDonald's trying to send off the latest spreadsheet or be able to get their orders in. I mean, that's absurd. And of course we're going to lose folks when that's the case. And Senator Grassley has sat there for 5 decades and has watched it all happen. We have an opportunity here and we need to get it done.
All right, thank you, Congresswoman. A March poll from the Des Moines Register and MediaCom shows that Iowans have a positive approval rating of President Biden of just 59%. That's a 59% disapproval rate. 35% say they approve of the job he is doing. 6% are unsure. So we're asking you to give him a grade. At this point in his presidency, give the president a letter grade for his job performance and explain your answer. Admiral Franken, you're first.
Sure, happy to. Well, he didn't plan on Ukraine happening. The president didn't plan on the Trump administration doing so poorly to come out of the pandemic. He didn't plan on the divisiveness which exists in America. He didn't plan on these things, and there was no ability to plan it. Who would have thought this? The drought issues, a lot of things have bedraggled this administration, but all said, I'd give him a solid B. Iowans are doing well, generally speaking, with the exception of those on the lower rung of income who are struggling. And that is because we've put programs in effect, oftentimes trumpeted by Senator Grassley and the Republican Party, which have segmented the society into the haves and the have-nots. I see President Biden doing a fabulous job to close that gap and close the culture and political gap to give us a more peaceable and a more convivial nation. And I'm all for him.
All right, Admiral Frank and Congressman Finkenauer, what grade would you give the president?
Well, I am not a teacher, so I don't know if I'm going to give him a grade, but I guess if I had to, B for Biden. And the reality is, this has been a tough year and a half for America as we are still coming through this pandemic, as folks are trying to figure out childcare, as they're trying to figure out still how to actually afford their prescription drugs, when you still have a United States Senate not willing to move on so many of the issues that are important here. But one thing I'll say is this, something we should be celebrating is the fact that finally, with a Democratic president, we were able to pass infrastructure reform. But the biggest piece is this. We have to have United States senators sitting there wanting to do the work, bringing those investments into our communities and actually protecting Buy American and prevailing wage provisions on those projects. That is something I will do. And honestly, I think there needs to be a bit more work done making sure states like Iowa can't get around them.
All right, Congresswoman Dr. Hurst, we've got 2 Bs so far. What grade would you give the president?
Well, I'm going to have to give him a B+. And coming from a progressive candidate, the only progressive candidate in this race, I think that's a really high mark. But I do believe that he deserves it. Joe Biden, in his first 100 days of his presidency, put forward some phenomenal LGBTQ legislation. He put forward a lot of great things in the Build Back Better plan that got cut back, and then they were cut back again, and they were cut back again, and finally it was lost because of a moderate set of senators, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, and we don't want to be sending a senator to Washington, D.C., who is going to equivocate on some of these great progressive things that Biden put forward. So I would suggest that one of our candidates up here was opposed to even the skinny version of that bill. I would have supported Build Back Better all the way. We would have had an A+ nation by then.
Right. The next question is about Ukraine. President Biden has asked Congress to pass $33 billion in additional aid to that nation in its ongoing war with Russia. So my question is this: with the war having now gone on for 2 months, do you have a red line in that war with Russia, a point at which you would support sending U.S. troops into Ukraine? Congresswoman Finkenauer, you answer first. 60 seconds.
I do not support sending U.S. troops into Ukraine. I support making sure that we are doing everything we can short of sending in U.S. troops to support Ukraine, whether that is additional spending that we're sending over in terms of weapons, in terms of making sure they have what they need. And again, I've been happy to see the sanctions being stepped up, not just by the United States of America, but also by NATO countries. And I mean, gosh, you look at Germany in particular, when they decided to actually put on sanctions, that was extraordinary. And I think a lot of that has to do with the U.S. finally stepping up when it comes to our diplomacy and actually reestablishing our stake here on the world stage and bringing people together again. That is something that I'd focus on as a United States Senator, in particular the State Department. This is where we should be investing and actually, again, rebuilding these relationships and making sure they are strong when moments like this happen.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Dr. Hurst, what's your red line with Ukraine?
Well, we absolutely should not be sending U.S. troops to Ukraine. We should be sending humanitarian efforts to all of the refugees that are pouring into Poland and countries surrounding the Ukraine. We should be opening up the borders here in Iowa to bring more refugees to our community. We have so many rural communities that have jobs that need filled and have the ability to open their arms to people of different cultures. And we should really be embracing that opportunity to bring people here. I believe that the function of NATO is sound. It was part of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Four Freedoms. It's what built NATO and the Atlantic Treaty. It was what built the UN. We should be standing with our NATO partners who are also not sending troops, but who are providing that humanitarian aid. And I absolutely think that the opportunities are astounding for us to reach out across the continent of Europe.
Dr. Hurst, thank you. Admiral Franken, you served in the military. What's your red line? Would you send U.S. troops into Ukraine?
Well, I have a lot of experience in the area as well. You can't do justice to this question in a minute. There are issues associated with being the world's broad-shouldered democracy. And I do believe, though, if Vladimir Putin uses a nuclear weapon against Ukraine, like-minded countries like the United States and others should put American souls along with other nations to help pick up the pieces internal to Ukraine. That's a red line. We must step forward. We cannot let the use of weapons of mass destruction against a large population and a democracy ever be used and go without retort. So yes, you have to have a red line in life. Otherwise, you are not a first-rate nation. Otherwise, you're not an American. You're not a leading democracy of the world. And you must step up. It's unfortunate, but it's necessary.
Admiral Franken, thank you.
Moving on now, the United States is the only wealthy country in the world without any guaranteed paid parental leave. Britain has 39 weeks, Japan 52 weeks, Sweden 68 weeks. Should the U.S. mandate paid parental leave? And how would you get major employers on board? Dr. Hurst, you have 60 seconds.
Paid parental leave was part of the Build Back Better plan that, like I said, was cast aside because of Joe Manchin and a Kyrsten Sinema. I believe that we absolutely want to move forward in this nation, and I would support 6 months of parental leave at the minimum. How do we get big business on board with that? Well, let's look at the wealth curve in this nation since trickle-down economics of the Reagan era. We've seen a sequestering of money at the top 1% of this nation for the last 4 decades. It is time for us to reclaim the money that has sat at that top 1% and put it into the services that Americans need. And one of those services is paid family leave. And I would propose that we institute a wealth tax to collect that money and to make sure that American families are first, well before American corporations.
Thank you, Dr. Hurst. Admiral Franken, you have 60 seconds. Same question.
Sure. Well, the United States military does paid family leave, both for both spouses and or if you're adopting, et cetera. We've been doing that for quite some time. This is a right. It's a necessity. This nation will be better for it. How to pay for it? Great question. I would suggest that in the labor market in America, we have gone for efficiency. Efficiency is interesting, but it's not a prerequisite for a good business plan. A good business plan is an efficacy to work, to have the flexibility in your staff, to be able to take the downs and the ups and ensure that you can have people removed from the workplace for an extended period while they're taking care of the next generation. It's necessary. It must be done. And yes, the upper 1% of America is sitting on unbelievable amounts of cash, as is corporate America. Look at what's happening with earnings. It's unbelievable. There's money for this, plentiful money, and we should make it happen now.
Thank you, Admiral Franken. Congresswoman Finkenauer, same question to you. You have 60 seconds.
Well, this is actually one of the issues I worked on while I was in Congress. In fact, was a co-sponsor of the Paid Family Leave Act. In particular, what's so exciting about that piece of legislation is it's not just about if you have a child or you adopt a child. It is about if your parents get sick and being able to take the time to care for them when they need it. And anybody in your family, when those crises arise, to be able to be there. Those are the values that I grew up with here in Iowa. That's just what we do. That is who we are. And that's why it's so important to actually pass that in the United States Senate. Honestly, the reason it didn't get passed is because you have people there like Senator Grassley, again, who's been there for 47 years. He's had, his whole time there. He could have done something, but honestly, the guy has forgotten who he's supposed to fight for. If he remembered those values, he'd be all over it and be ready to pass it, but unfortunately he's not. And again, it's why we need to beat him.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Our debate with the 3 Democrats running for U.S. Senate is just getting started. We have another half hour ahead.
When we come back, we'll ask the candidates how they plan to beat the incumbent Republican, Chuck Grassley, should he capture his party's nomination on June 7th. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, and we continue by talking about Senator Charles Grassley. He currently holds this U.S. Senate seat and is seeking re-election, running against challenger Jim Carlin. According to filings from the Federal Election Commission, Senator Grassley has raised about $6.4 million. That's more than the three of you combined. He also has more than twice the cash on hand than the three of you. If you were to win this party's nominee for U.S. Senate, how could you overcome his financial advantage and Grassley's 42 years of experience serving Iowa in the Senate? Admiral Franklin, you answer first.
Well, I cast aside the money issue. That's never been an issue in Iowa elections when you're running for such an important thing. I'm the product of a great Iowa, a fabulous Iowa, and I'm the worst nightmare for the GOP. All those things that they tout, I ace them out. Born and raised in northwestern Iowa, very, very rural. My mom a school teacher, my dad working with his hands from a shop, a war veteran, youngest of 9 kids. That wholesomeness in rural Iowa where you worked from a farmhand to construction to working in my dad's machine shop, welding early on to slaughterhouse, a scholarship to college, this bootstrap existence to retire as the most senior military officer in the state, and ultimately the most senior military officer ever elected to the U.S. Senate. I'm not so sure Senator Grassley has any accomplishment that comes close.
Thank you, Admiral. Congresswoman Finkenauer, same question to you. How do you beat Chuck Grassley?
Well, we start with the differences between us. Obviously, there are many, but the biggest one is this. I will never forget where I come from and who I fight for. My dad was a union pipe fitter welder. I'd be a 6-year-old going to bed at night in old t-shirts that had tiny little holes all over them from the sparks of his welding torch. That's something you don't forget, and that is why I have done what I have done in public service, because I've seen my friends and my family being forgotten in Des Moines and in Washington, D.C., and I have watched as Senator Grassley has sat there and let it happen. It is about holding him accountable for who he's become. I mean, he walks around this state like he's Mr. Rural America, yet we've lost 30,000 family farms in this state. I've watched as my friends have left. It is time we finally beat him, and we can, because of the coalitions we bring together. Every time I've been on the ticket, we have gotten more votes than the Democrats above us who've had more money. It's about bringing our working men and women together. I've been endorsed by the Iowa Federation of Labor. It's about bringing women and young people together as well in this. We've got campus organizers all over this state, and we are going to beat him with that coalition.
Thank you. Dr. Hurst, same question to you. How do you beat the senator?
Well, we have to accept the reality of our current situation. And this is a very polarized nation right now. And Chuck Grassley must be put in that position as the individual who has accepted the Trump endorsement, even though he's being run against from the right a little bit. But the reality is, we as Democrats have lost at the top of the ticket for the U.S. Senate in the last, 4 general elections. The last candidate that won as a Democrat was Tom Harkin, a progressive candidate. And I'm the only progressive candidate in this race. If my opponents were to be running against Grassley in his first election, it would have been in a primary. That's how I differentiate myself from my opponents. We must have a progressive Democrat who's going to push for Medicare for all, who's going to push for student loan forgiveness, who's going to support the Green New Deal. And that's the way we win this race. I agree with Mike. It is not about the dollars. It's about the message.
We will now ask each candidate a question specific to themselves and their campaign. Again, they will have 60 seconds to respond. We'll begin with Congresswoman Finkenauer. Congresswoman Finkenauer, you faced a challenge to signatures on your nomination petition and ultimately needed the Iowa Supreme Court to ensure you would appear on the ballot in this race. What does that tell voters about the effectiveness of your campaign going forward?
Well, it should tell voters that Senator Grassley and GOP operatives really did not want to be up against me come November. Luckily and happily, the Iowa Supreme Court did the right thing, followed the law, and we are on that ballot, and we intend to beat him. Again, it's about the differences between us. It is about those bills that I passed while I was in Congress that guy sat there and didn't move on. I mean, we're talking about prescription drug reform. we get to talk about that. I voted for that. I passed that out of the House, and he was sitting over in the U.S. Senate taking $1 million from pharmaceutical companies since he's been in office and literally writing the bill, making it so Medicare doesn't negotiate with drug companies and can't bring down those prices. I mean, it's ridiculous that he has not yet been held accountable for it yet, but we are taking him on like never before and building a coalition to actually beat him. And folks, we have to. It is also about our democracy. That's what we're talking about here.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Admiral Franken, you ran unsuccessfully for the United States Senate, the Democratic nomination in 2020. You finished second to Teresa Greenfield. What did that campaign teach you, and how did that change the way you approach this campaign?
Well, we were a little bit set aside by COVID, certainly, but I was also attacked by dark money. So we don't take corporate PAC money, and I fear dark money coming after me again for I don't know why. And regarding being a progressive candidate, I believe I've always been in the sweet spot for a positive future for the state of Iowa and this country. My head's in the right spot. Yes, I want to get rid of the filibuster. Yes, I would like Medicare for all or Medicare by choice. Yes, I'm a big fan of the Build Back Better plan. But the reason I gave Biden a B is because I would have segmented that up. I would have put it in pieces that are bite-sized and get those passed. Why do I say that? Because I worked for Ted Kennedy, the lion of the Senate who knew how to get things done. And I go to work on day one in the U.S. Senate as Obama's Chief of Legislative Affairs, formerly getting things done. This I can do.
Admiral, thank you.
Dr. Hurst, a few times tonight you've already used the word progressive, and you've used it a lot. You bill yourself as a progressive at a time when Iowa statewide races appears to be turning more red. So in a race like this, what type of Democrat will it take to win a statewide race here? Someone closer to the center or someone further to the left?
Sure, it absolutely is going to take a person further to the left. As I mentioned before, we've had 4 general elections that have passed with moderate Democrats running at the top of the ticket, and they've all lost. And the purpose of those top of the ticket candidates is to deliver the Democratic Party. And that's why we've been losing in the Iowa Senate and the Iowa State House, because the top of the ticket candidate isn't delivering. We need a candidate that runs on bold progressive ideas, because those are the people who have stopped showing up. Albert Einstein said it. Continuing to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is insanity. And we have to avoid the insanity of sending more moderate candidates up against these Republican candidates who are extremists. Republicans have candidates they like. They're called Republicans. We need to run a Democrat who stands for Medicare for all, not something like Medicare for all, who stands for getting rid of the filibuster completely, not cutting it back slightly.
Thank you, Dr. Hurst.
Moving over to agriculture and biofuels, President Biden visited Iowa last month to announce the temporary expansion of E15 fuels, and now advocates are asking him to make that expansion permanent. What do you think about ethanol expansion, and do you have any concerns about the possible environmental impact this fuel source may have? Congresswoman Finkenauer, you have 60 seconds.
I absolutely support year-round E15. I think that was the right decision for President Biden to make at the moment, but he should support year-round. That is something actually I asked for while I was in Congress. And in fact, one of the things that I focused on as well are the fact that we've got these oil and gas companies who've been getting away with a whole heck of a lot for a very, very long time, including even getting around blending requirements when it comes to ethanol. This is the time when we should be using what Iowa does best, and we should be making sure that we are supporting that industry. But it also, again, makes sure that these big oil companies aren't just skirting the rules. I actually had an investigation into that fact when the Trump administration let them do it. Again, these are things that we need to continue to work on and continue to innovate, because Iowa has always done that well when it comes to renewable fuels, when it comes to using, wind, solar. And it's something I'm really proud about in the fact that I come from this state and what we've been able to do.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Dr. Hurst, same question to you. You have 60 seconds.
Sure. Could you restate the
premise? What do you think about the possible expansion of ethanol, and do you have any concerns about the environmental impact?
And to be clear, you were talking about the expansion of ethanol. I do not believe we should be expanding our ethanol efforts. And the reason is, we've been told by Detroit they're going to stop making combustion engines. Vehicles are going to be EVs. And we can, as a state, either try to squeeze every little last drop out of ethanol as we can, or we can take a progressive idea of introducing a third crop into our duopoly of corn and soy and make it a profitable center, a profitable market for Iowa farmers. We've tried that a few times and we failed, and it's because we haven't done what a senator would do, which is use the Farm Bill to provide opportunities for the refining of things like hemp oil or processing of fibers, bringing back canneries to Iowa so that crops that we actually eat in this state could be raised. We've got to do something more than just keep prices low so we can feed hogs for China.
Hurst. Admiral Franken, do you support the expansion of ethanol, and what do you think about its environmental impacts?
Well, I'm an engineer, an extensive experience in technical matters, physics, etc. Perhaps one of the most technical people ever to be elected to the U.S. Senate. So I look at things in a more broad, energy-intensive way, environmental concerns, etc. I believe increasing a year-long E15 will help in the short term, but it should not be something that is necessarily permanent. We should be looking for alternate uses of ethanol, airplane fuel, ship fuel, using it in situ, using it in Iowa as a fuel source for power generation. And to that end, giving Iowa a different environmental perspective and not villainize our farmers and produce a variety of crops. We have a great opportunity to do this. We've got the latitude and the topsoil and the initiative and the intelligence in this state to reconstruct the energy grid, and ethanol will be on the helpful side.
Thank you, Admiral.
Tonight, candidates, we've talked about threats to this nation, both foreign and domestic. My question is, what's the biggest threat to Iowa right now, and what should we do about it? Dr. Hurst, the question goes to you first.
Sure, there are huge threats to Iowa right now, Chuck Grassley being one of them. We've had a 25% population loss in the last 40 years in our rural communities. We have 40 hospitals at high risk for closure. Many of our rural hospitals have stopped delivering babies, and they have part-time emergency departments. We have the second worst bridges in the nation, and we have hundreds of bodies of water that are unsafe for human consumption or recreation. What is the threat to Iowa? The threat to Iowa is sending Chuck Grassley back to the U.S. Senate. We need to address these problems in a very specific manner. Medicare for All puts investment into our rural communities, trains more providers, gives every person access to health care so that they can choose to live in our communities, so that immigrants can come to Iowa and build homes and raise families. We have got to get together with the Medicare for All Act and pass it for this nation.
Dr. Hurst, thank you. Admiral Franken, what's the biggest threat to Iowa?
So the divisiveness amongst all of us. We are not getting along. We've got problems in our family, in our friends network, in our communities. There's just this vile divisiveness, and it's perpetrated by the far right, frankly, and it is an absolute cancer that's affecting society. It keeps us from joining together to work on the solutions that Iowa needs. This is the problem. We need people who are more conciliatory, people who can work through things logically, remove the crazy emotion and the little sharp sound bites, which the Republicans are so adept at using, and talk sense, and come from a sense of humanity and nation first that I represent. I can beat Chuck Grassley because he's Chuck Grassley and because he's part of the system, and lead Iowa to gel together for a better future.
Admiral, thank you. Congresswoman Finkenauer, biggest threat to Iowa?
Well, there's a few. One, I think we talked about at the beginning, but worth noting again, if you're a woman in this state and of childbearing age, what the Supreme Court did this week and what will become final, I imagine, in the next month or so, is horrifying. I'm somebody who hopes to have children here in Iowa, and what we're talking about is going to cause women to die. That's where this is going. And again, what's next? We are going to, again, it's going to be our LGBTQ brothers and sisters across the state and this country who are worried about their future as well. But bigger than that, I mean, beyond even abortion rights and women's rights and LGBTQ rights, it's about the fact that we have somebody who's been sitting in the U.S. Senate again for nearly 5 decades and has watched as our state's population has shrunk, as our young people have left, our smaller towns have gotten smaller, and he's done nothing about it. This is my home, and I'm going to keep fighting like hell for it.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
There's been a lot of talk the last several years about at the Iowa Capitol about what should be happening in Iowa classrooms, schools across the state. Everything from critical race theory to parents' rights to cameras in the classrooms. So what should the role of government be in our kids' education? Admiral Franken?
Well, the government has a role in being the referee and being the instigator of expanded educational opportunities, for making it ensured that every student has that same opportunity. Regarding the animus that we have in the state of Iowa, that's perpetrated by people that are crazy thoughts of critical race theory, which I have interesting conversations about. I ask them, what aspect of CRT are you speaking of? And I get this blubbering response. Frankly, they don't know what they're speaking of. Our teachers, my mom was a teacher, my wife was a vocational teacher, my sister, etc. These are great Americans. Let them teach. Go to your school board, grade their homework, ensure your child's doing well in school, get engaged in those activities that you should. Visit, volunteer, do those things that a parent ought to do, but for crying out loud, quit vilifying teachers, quit telling them what books are permissible, and let them teach.
Well, Frank, and Congresswoman Finkenauer, what's the role of government in our classrooms?
Making sure that our kids, our teachers, and our parents have what they need. That's one of the things, you know, I came from the State House first, and one of the biggest roles as a state representative is funding our public schools. One of the first speeches I gave on that State House floor was about the fact that we weren't funding even at the rate of inflation. And our students were going to go without. And again, now you're looking at our governor and these legislators talking about taking public money and putting it in private schools. That's horrifying. That is not going to help grow our small towns. In fact, it's going to make us lose jobs. And so one of the things that I focus on the federal level is making sure we get the funding into the places that need it most. Here's the thing. When you've got a governor who goes on Fox News and sits there and decides to throw back $90 million that could have went to our school districts who desperately needed it, I would make sure as a U.S. Senator that we have a backstop, making sure that if she's going to do what she did, that we have school districts able to bring those dollars in separately.
All right, Congresswoman Dr. Hurst, what's the role of the government in the classrooms?
Sure. It's very simple. The role of the government is to prepare our students to be American citizens and to participate in the American economy. In order to do that, we really have to rethink education a bit more broadly. We certainly don't want to be privatizing education. I would never support a school voucher system. I would never vote in favor of an appointment for a Secretary of Education who had not been a teacher or at least had a child in public schools, as Donald Trump appointed. I would support expanding our public education system. That doesn't necessarily mean everybody needs to go to college, but we should be paying for people to go to trade school. We should be paying students to go to community college because that's the level of education that's necessary to enter our workforce. We should also be forgiving student debt for those who are holding loans and make repayments to those who have made recent payments of their student debt. That's how we help educators.
Dr. Hurst, thank you. You mentioned bridges earlier and those that need repair in our state. Iowa received a C on the American Society of Civil Engineers' most recent infrastructure report card. The state received more than $400 million from the federal government to fix bridges, along with millions of more for other pieces of infrastructure. This is for Congresswoman Finkenauer. Does the federal government need to spend more to fix the state's infrastructure?
Well, one of the things we need to do is actually make sure that the funding is getting to the communities who need it most. This was something that I worked on again while I was in Congress. Actually, there was the Helping Communities Invest in Infrastructure Act. The reason I did that is as I got out there to the 20 counties and started talking to folks, I realized, oh, Dubuque and Cedar Rapids, they've got lobbyists that can go get those dollars in and bring them into their communities. You know who doesn't? Dyersville. You know who doesn't? Elkader. They also need those dollars into their communities. And so the Helping Communities Invest in Infrastructure Act actually put funding in to actually work with those communities to bring in those dollars. That, again, is one of the things we need our U.S. senators doing. It is about actually taking the funding, making sure it works. And the other piece is this. Iowa has passed legislation getting around Made in America and prevailing wage provisions. We have to make sure that a state like Iowa cannot do that. That is also something I passed while I was in Congress and would do in the U.S. Senate, because we're talking about Iowans being able to stay close to home with good paying jobs instead of having to leave the state to work on road or bridge projects.
We're going to send this next question, same question, to Dr. Hurst. What can be done federally to fix the state's infrastructure?
Well, I hope we're thinking broadly about what infrastructure means. Infrastructure isn't just roads and bridges to get to work. There are a lot of impediments to everyday Americans getting to work. Things like childcare. We need to have consistent, affordable childcare in all of our communities so that our entire workforce can get back to work. It's incredibly difficult. I myself was a single parent when I adopted my son. Hi, James. It's just incredibly important to be able to have that type of access so that you can continue to participate in the economy. I know I continue to go back to Medicare for All Act over and over and over again, but I am telling you it should be called the Rural Recovery Act because there's so much in there to help our rural communities. When you strengthen your hospitals in rural Iowa, you have a place to run that rural broadband to, that high-speed broadband. Then you can peel that off to your auto mechanic because my car didn't get a tune-up. It got a software upgrade.
Thank you, Dr. Hurst. Admiral Franken, same question to you.
Well, I look at what the big plans, the huge plans that can be done, like rural electrification, done by the Democrats, and it changed America. It really changed America. This is the type of effort that the Build Back Better plan had in it. And how to get that passed, because that changes the societal issues that Dr. Hurst spoke of. It changes how my niece in small town Iowa, 5 miles on a gravel road from a small town, they don't need 3 incomes to survive, where they have options for childcare, where their job growth. We need an infrastructure plan that expands Iowa, expands us and makes us the nucleus for economic development, where Davenport is a transport location on river and rail and road networks, and where we don't have governors who stop high-speed rails coming in the United States. We need this. Thanks.
Next, we're going into what we call our lightning round. We give you quick questions, and you give us quick answers, emphasis on quick. And the order will be the same for each one. We'll go left to right, of course, on everyone's television screen. Admiral Franken first, then Dr. Hurst, then Congresswoman Finkenauer. How do you plan to vote? By mail, early in person, or Election Day?
Yay, I love these. In person, Woodbury County. See you there.
We vote early, in person.
In person, Election Day.
You are pulling long hours on the campaign trail. How about what fuels you in the coffee shops around Central Iowa? What keeps you going? What do you drink to keep going? Admiral Franken?
I try not to drink more than 2, but I stop at 4 cups of coffee. I try to exercise every day still. That's important. Try to eat kind of well, not so much. But I have great people around me as well. And Iowans fuel me.
I'm coffee black.
Oh man, Daniel, my husband, is gonna cringe that I'm bringing this up, but he wakes me up with a cup of coffee every morning. Just take it black.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Same thing, same path. What's playing in your head? What's on your playlist on the campaign road?
In music.
Well, I use a variety from a place called Playing for Change. You probably haven't seen it, but it's an international group of artists because I view the world globally.
All right, well, we have to cut it off for timing-wise. We're going to move ahead. Finally, tonight, we're giving the candidates each an opportunity to make a closing statement. Each candidate will have 1 minute. We drew names out of a hat to determine the order, and we begin with Dr. Hurst.
Well, thank you. I hope, if anything, you've heard tonight that if you support Medicare for all, then you've found your candidate. If not, you've got two good people here to choose from. If you support the Green New Deal, then you found your candidate. And again, if not, you've got two good people to choose from. If you support LGBTQI rights and making sure that a woman's right to choose is guaranteed by passing legislation as well as getting rid of the filibuster, you found your candidate. If you believe in reparations and in paying off student debt, then you've found your candidate. Iowa has done fantastic with candidates who run on progressive policies. Candidates like Tom Harkin, a prairie progressive, pragmatic, who delivered the American with Disabilities Act. It will be my pleasure to deliver the Medicare for All Act.
Thank you, Dr. Hurst. Congresswoman Finkenauer, you have 60 seconds.
So Iowa's my home. It's where I grew up, and it is why I'm in this race. Look, when it comes to public service and what it means to me, I didn't learn from, decades of having politicians in my family, but I learned it from my grandfather, who was a firefighter. This guy is the one who taught me what public service was all about. When he would run into a burning building, he didn't call back and ask before he ran in, what color's your skin, how much money do you make, who do you love? He just showed up and he helped people and he did his job. That is what I did in that state house. That is what I did in Congress, and that is what I'll do as your United States Senator. It is incredibly important that we finally hold Senator Grassley accountable for everything that he has done that has hurt Iowans and also what he hasn't done. This is an opportunity we haven't had here in a generation, and it's going to take a generational candidate to beat him. Folks, you've got my word. I am going to do everything I can because Iowa is my home. This is our country. And I'm going to fight like hell for it.
Congresswoman, thank you. Admiral Franken.
Again, I'm a product of a great Iowa, and I can beat Chuck Grassley. A poll done 2 weeks ago, I'm neck and neck. I can outwork him. I can outrepresent him. I'm more relatable than he is to Iowans. He's gone. He's been gone forever, and he never has really come back. A farmer, that's laughable. He's no more small town Iowa than people in his hometown think he is. He's beatable. We need a breath of fresh air. We need someone who can work across the aisle and get substantial legislation done like I did for Ted Kennedy and Barack Obama and even the Bush administration, for crying out loud. I can work issues and get them passed. I'm here to work hard for Iowa, and I'm happy that Franken for Iowa is my website, and you can see where my positions are. And I look forward to seeing you in one of our many get-togethers. We've had 50 so far in 50 counties, and we've got another 50 to go. Thank you.
Admiral, thank you. And we want to thank all of our candidates for the U.S. Senate for taking part in tonight's debate. Congresswoman Abby Finkenauer, Admiral Mike Franken, and Dr. Glenn Hurst. They'll be on the ballot June 7th.
And we want to thank you at home for watching. On behalf of KTIV's Matt Breen, KCRG's Ethan Stein, and KWQC's Hernan Gutierrez, I'm KCCI's Eric Hansen. Thank you, and have a great night.